Welcome to Eerie Echoes, where shadows linger a little longer, and the mountains keep the secrets you were never meant to hear. Tonight, we descend deep into the Appalachian Mountains, a place where folklore and reality blur into something darker. From winged creatures that warn of disaster, to voices that curse a family, to lights that burn in the night sky, and live swallowed whole by the wilderness. These hills hold stories that will follow you long after the telling is done. Tonight, I'll share with you 7 true inspired encounters from Appalachia. Each one carved into the land, each one whispered into the dark, each one waiting for you. Let's begin. Our first story is called The Mothman of Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant wore the quiet of late autumn like an old coat. Wool soft, river damp, stitched with routine. The streets went still early. The diner closed at 9. The silver bridge arched across the water, carrying headlights like beads on a string. People worked, watched the weather, and slept. But that November, something else woke up. The first time folks said they saw it, they were out by the old TNT area, a scatter of concrete bunkers from the war, dome-shaped and half-swallowed by thorn and vine. The road there was a cracked ribbon sunk in weeds. Rust had chewed the fence posts. The only sound was gravel under tires and the long exhale of the river beyond the trees. Then the headlights found a shape, tall, too tall to be a man. Wings folded tight along a barrel chest. The surface of it didn't reflect like feathers. It ate the light, drank it down. And the eyes, those eyes didn't flash like an animal's. They glowed. 2 red embers, steady and deliberate, as if the creature had decided it was time to be seen. The driver swore his foot hit the gas before his brain could catch up. The car leapt forward. The shape unfolded, wings unfurling with a soft, sickening rush, and rose. No running start, no scramble, just up. The road straightened and the speedometer climbed. 80, 90. The creature kept pace, gliding past telephone poles as if gravity hadn't been told about it. The red eyes never blinked. When the town's streetlights appeared, the thing veered into the dark like a leaf caught by a sudden current. The couples tumbled into the police station, still shaking, describing the same impossible details from different mouths. Word moved faster than the river. People started checking the sky when they took out the trash. Dogs refused to go past the tree line. A postal worker said something big had been perched on the roof of the sorting facility at dawn, hunched, silent, watching the doors. A man on a back road cut his headlights to pee and flicked them on to find those red globes reflecting from the ditch, exactly at windshield height, and he forgot he'd ever been thirsty. He backed up so fast he left rubber, then told himself it had to have been a trick of the light, because the other choice wouldn't let him sleep. Strange noises threaded themselves through town. A low hum, like a transformer in the dead of night, until you realized there wasn't one anywhere nearby. Radios bloomed with static in pockets. The grocery store aisle between canned peaches and bread flour, the middle pew of the church, the loading dock behind the hardware shop. Women said their televisions filled with snow when they were alone, and the snow seemed to pulse with its own cold breath. Hunters who knew every whistle and rustle of the forest agreed on one thing. The woods had changed its mind about you. It wasn't just watching, it was waiting. The old men at the diner got quieter. Teenagers dared each other to drive by the TNT domes and, too often, came back pale and talking over each other, tripping on words. One girl described wings scraping the roof like a broom dragged over sheet metal. A boy who made jokes about everything didn't make any about the red eyes. He kept rubbing his arms as if something cold had touched him that never left. You could call it panic. You could call it mass suggestion. But the sightings didn't line up neatly like a rumor usually does. A mother walking her kid home from choir heard something that wasn't teed the wind and turned to see a shadow move between sodium lamps as if it were choosing which light to kill. Two gravediggers watched a dark shape lift itself from a line of trees beyond the fence and glide in silence across the tops of the stones. And for once, neither of them had a story to top the other. There were other whispers too, men in pressed suits, not from town, asking soft questions and taking hard notes. Car doors that shut themselves when you looked, and the taste of metal when they left. People later called them men in black. Maybe that was another story trying to grow legs. Or maybe the shape in the sky wasn't the only thing Point Pleasant couldn't explain. The fear swelled and ebbed like the river, and then the river took. December 15, 1967 arrived like any other winter day, gray and practical. By evening, the stores were lit like tiny aquariums, people moving slow among tinsel. The Silver Bridge wore a queue of cars climbing its back. A woman tapped her steering wheel to the radio. A boy in the back of a truck tried to fog a dragon in the cold. The weight settled onto the suspension like a hand on a shoulder. Then something gave. A snap like a rifle. A second that sounded like a metallic scream. The bridge shifted, shuddered, folded. One chain broke, then another, like links deciding to forget one another. Headlights pointed up, then down, then vanished into black water that flexed beneath them and closed. Metal groaned the way a building might if it learned how to grieve. By the time the river settled, it had swallowed 46 lives. Sirens cut the night into red pieces. Men threw ropes that found nothing. The town rushed to the riverbank and stood there helpless, the cold making enemies of their breath and their throats. In the days after, the sorrow was too large to measure. It changed the town's shape and soul. It still does. People asked if the creature had been seen that week. Some said yes. Perched high on the steel, a dark bracket against the sky, red eyes like warning lights that no one understood. Others said the thing had been spotted at the edge of the river nights before, head cocked, as if listening to some deep note that only it could hear. Skeptics wrote it off as a crane with a broken migration, a trick of fog, an owl made monstrous by fear. But the stories didn't step aside. They settled in. The name Mothman took root. It flowered into a legend that would not be mowed down by time. Decades pass. People drive newer cars over different steel. They hang ornaments, sweep porches, carry their grief like a photograph in a wallet, handled, softened, never erased. But if you ask around, you'll still hear it. The hum that comes before the thing arrives, the way radios falter, the pause in a dog's bark that means something has stepped out of one world and into the edge of yours. Some say the Mothman is a harbinger, a messenger of disaster we aren't smart enough to read. Others say it feeds on the attention, growing large on our fear. A few think it's a guardian, terrible in form, sad in purpose, showing up when the seam between safety and catastrophe frays. None of those answers let you sleep any better. If you cross the river on a clear night and roll your windows down, the Ohio smells like iron and old rain. You can park where the bridge used to land and look up into the dark. The air above the water doesn't move the way the air over land does. It carries memory differently. Sometimes a ripple in the sky will make your chest tighten as if the atmosphere just inhaled. You'll tell yourself that's nothing. Night wind, small birds, bats. And then you'll remember the eyes you've only ever heard about, and you'll understand why people locked their doors for reasons they couldn't explain, and why a town with a name as gentle as Point Pleasant still leaves its porch lights on a little longer than it needs to. What remains is a feeling you can't put down, that the world is fragile in all the wrong places, that warnings don't always arrive as words, that the past hasn't finished with us just because the calendar says so. Maybe the Mothman was a misidentified bird. Maybe it was fear with wings. Or maybe, in a time when steel failed and the river closed over names, something came to stand witness, the only way it knew how. Vast, uncanny, and impossible to ignore. When people in Point Pleasant tell the story, their voices change on the part where the bridge falls, softer but not hushed, as if there's a right volume for grief and they've learned it over years. They'll tell you about the funerals and the casseroles and the new bridge and the strange comfort of routine returning like a tide. And then, if the room is quiet and your eyes meet, they'll tell you about the nights afterward, about the sound they heard on the roof once, the heavy drag of something that didn't belong to any common bird, about a winter walk where the trees leaned in and the path underfoot felt both familiar and wrong, like stepping onto a memory that hasn't finished forming. And yes, about the red glint in a puddle that had no business glinting at all. You can drive away from Point Pleasant. You can follow the river north or south and tell yourself you're leaving the story behind. But some stories travel at a speed limit all their own. They ride in your rear view until you forget to check, and then they sit in the passenger seat like an old friend you never meant to see again. And when a late broadcast cuts to static for half a second, or a transformer hum deepens into a note your spine understands, the legend leans forward and reminds you it has your number. This is Eerie Echoes, and I don't pretend to solve anything. I only tell you what people tell me and try to carry their words carefully across the dark. The Appalachians have more than one voice, and not all of them have wings. Some whisper, and the whisper bites harder than a scream. Our next stop takes us south and a little west, into hills where a farmhouse learned to talk back, and a family learned what it costs when the night decides it knows your name. A haunting without a face, a presence without a body, a voice that laughed when prayers grew tired. The Mothman left Point Pleasant shrouded in fear, its legend flying on wings no one could forget. But the Appalachians don't run out of shadows. Just beyond those ridges in northern Tennessee, there was another tale, one that didn't appear in the sky but spoke in the dark. A story of whispers that turned into screams, of a farmhouse that refused silence, and of a witch whose voice still echoes through the hollows of Adams. This is the legend of the Bell Witch. The Bell family settled in Robertson County, Tennessee, early in the 1800s. The land stretched wide, rolling fields, trees hemming the horizon, a farmhouse proud against the wilderness. John Bell, the father, was respected, and neighbors called his land fertile and his house warm. But by 1817, that warmth had turned cold. It began simply, as many hauntings do, scratching in the walls, soft thumps in the attic, a sound like rats chewing wood or claws against the planks. The family searched and found nothing. Then the sounds followed them into the night. Knocks on doors with no one outside, rustling blankets pulled from beds, a whisper that had no throat. The youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, was the first to suffer. Invisible hands tugged her hair while she prayed. At night, she woke screaming as something slapped her face with no one near. Red welts rose on her arms. Her cries filled the farmhouse until her father rushed in, lantern in hand, only to see nothing but shadows shaking with her sobs. The Bell Witch had arrived. Unlike most hauntings, this one learned to talk. The sounds grew louder, sharper until they formed words. First muttering, then laughter. Then, clear as any neighbor, a woman's voice drifted through the rooms. Witnesses said it spoke scripture, mocking the family's prayers. It recited sermons from memory. It cackled when Betsy wept. Sometimes it whispered John Bell's name over and over until he begged the air to stop. The neighbors didn't believe it at first, until they came to hear for themselves. One night, several families gathered in the Bell's farmhouse, lanterns casting their glow across the wooden beams. They sat in silence, waiting. And then it came. A laugh, sharp as a knife's edge. A hymn sung in a voice that wasn't theirs. The Bible read aloud by no one they could see. Guests ran from the house pale as ash, swearing the devil had taken up residence in the Tennessee hills, and the spirit grew bolder. Betsy Bell bore the brunt. The witch seemed to hate her most, pulling her hair until it cracked against the bed frame, leaving bruises shaped like fingers. It hissed in her ear, promising she would never marry the man she loved. When Betsy announced her engagement, the spirit shrieked through the house until every window rattled, until the fiancé himself begged her to break it off. She did. John Bell, the patriarch, soon became the focus. The witch called him Old Jack Bell in a mocking tone, a nickname carried on cold air. His health declined. He grew weak, stumbling through the fields, his tongue heavy. Some nights he collapsed, his family rushing to his side, the spirit laughing while they cried. Neighbors claimed to hear the witch from the road, shouting curses through the open windows. Sometimes it sang, sometimes it shrieked. Always it spoke with venom. And then one morning John Bell didn't wake. December 20th, 1820. John Bell lay in bed, frail, unable to move. His son searched the cupboard for medicine, but found the vial empty. Instead, a strange black liquid sat in its place. The witch's voice rose, triumphant. "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, and he'll never get up again." John Bell was dead. At his funeral, mourners gathered as the preacher spoke. But even there, the witch would not be silent. Witnesses swore they heard her laugh, loud and cruel, echoing among the trees as if the very earth mocked their grief. The haunting lingered. Betsy continued to suffer, and though the witch faded with time, the legend rooted itself into Appalachian soil. People came from miles around to hear the stories, to walk past the old Bell property, to feel the shiver in the air where the farmhouse once stood. Today, the Bell Witch Cave still draws visitors, a limestone mouth near the old farm. Tourists whisper that voices drift through its depths, that laughter rides the damp air, that if you stay too long, you'll hear your name in the dark. Locals still lower their voices when they speak of it. Some say the witch never left, that she lingers for anyone foolish enough to doubt. And through the centuries, the Bell Witch became something rare. Not just a ghost story, but a piece of American folklore carved into the bones of Appalachia. Point Pleasant had the Mothman, Adams had the Bell Witch. Both left towns scarred, lives undone, legends unburied. One appeared with wings, the other with a voice. But Appalachia isn't finished yet. Deeper into North Carolina, the mountains hold another secret. Not a creature, not a voice, but a light. A strange glow that rises above Brown Mountain, flickering like lanterns carried by hands long dead. Scientists tried to explain it, but the people who've stood beneath it know better. Next, we chase the phantom glow of the Brown Mountain lights. It starts like this. You stand at Wiseman's View, a stone platform jutting into the night, and the gorge below holds its breath. Pines edge the precipice. Far off, the spine of Brown Mountain runs low and patient, a dark back under darker sky. You can hear the river in the distance if you requiet. Linville's voice is always a little hoarse, as if it has shouted for a long time and uses whispers now to save itself. Someone flicks a cigarette. Someone else clears a throat. A ranger's flashlight paints the rock and goes dark again. The cold smells like stone, sap, and old rain. It would be beautiful even if nothing happened. But that isn't why people come. The first light never announces itself in the place you're staring. It chooses the corner of your eye, a faint ember hovering above the ridgeline. Then another, a touch brighter, a little higher, as if the mountain has decided to breathe out stars from its own lungs. They don't flicker like distant headlights. They don't move like planes. They rise, drift, fall, split into two, and fuse again. Colors change, warm gold easing into white, white blushing to red, and then back to nothing as if someone pinched the universe between two fingers. Swamp gas, a skeptic once said behind me, until the ranger, gray-bearded, patient, wearing the forest in the lines of his face, smiled. "No swamps up there," he said. "Bedrock and scrub. Besides, they show in winter after a freeze. Swamp gas hates ice." He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was simply telling the mountain's version of the truth. Older versions are older still. The Cherokee have a story about ghostly lanterns borne by grieving women crossing the ridge, searching for loved ones taken by war. Another speaks of a hunter lost to a jealous river, his spirit wandering with a coal from the hearth so his wife can find him. Every explanation carries a flavor of kindness and sorrow, not malice. Lights as guides, lights as warnings, lights as proof that the living aren't the only ones who keep appointments after dark. Someone once tried to measure the immeasurable. In the early 1900s, a crew came with instruments and notebooks, calling angles, plotting bearings, checking train schedules. They decided the lights were refractions, automobile headlights bent by layers of air, or locomotives glancing off the low clouds like coins flicked into a fountain. The report read neat and tidy, but then the highway moved. The trains slowed. The lights stayed. And the people who had watched them since before the county laid its first rails kept coming anyway, because graphs are lovely things. But they've never told a ghost to keep quiet and had it listen. On one moon-thin night, a photographer named Claire set up a tripod beside me. She had hiked in long before sunset, boots clean from the cold, breath-making small ghosts in front of her face. Her hands knew her camera the way a pianist knows keys, fast, sure, tender. We talked in the short spaces between wind. She'd been here 5 times without luck. "They don't come on demand," the ranger said. "You can't audition the mountain. You wait until it invites you." When they came in a line. 3 at first, marching above the ridge as if following a path only they could see, then a 4th that rose from the gorge itself like a homecoming. Claire didn't gasp. She went to work. The shutter thudded a heartbeat rhythm. Long exposures, short bursts, a change of lens, more shots. She exhaled through her nose like someone who had been cold for a year and just found a fire. The lights moved as if they weren't T-bound to the air we know, north to south against the wind, up as the wind dropped, hovering when the gust returned. One slid toward us, bigger without growing brighter, as if closeness wasn't the same as light, but a cousin to it. For a second, I could see the shape of the trees along the ridge etched against it. Then it winked out, and my eyes tried to hold the afterimage like a hand trying to hold breath. A couple next to us started crying without embarrassment. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling you get at weddings and funerals, where time folds and you can almost see the 2 versions of yourself. The one who remembers and the one who will remember. The ranger didn't watch the lights. He watched us. That seemed right. I asked him when the sky went plain again what the strangest thing was he'd ever seen out here. He pointed to the overlook stones, their surfaces smoothed by a century of hands and boots and rain. "Not strangest," he said. "Heaviest. 2 winters ago, a gentleman about my age came every Thursday. Same spot, same thermos. Never spoke. One night, the lights climbed like stairs right where he was looking, then drifted to the right and settled above the gorge. He nodded once, just once. After they faded, he took his hat off and said, 'Thank you,' like he had been waiting on permission to go home." The ranger squinted into the dark. He never came back. He left a note with the volunteers. "I got my answer." Didn't say what the question was. The lights don't always comfort. A hiker named Raphael told me that a single white orb paced him along a ridge trail for nearly a mile, holding steady at his 12 o'clock in the sky. "Not ahead," he said. "Not to the side, above. If I stopped, it stopped. When I ducked under a branch and looked up again, it was closer. My headlamp washed out everything but that. I started to talk to it, out loud, like a fool. I told it my name and where I was from, and that my mom would be mad if I didn't get back by Sunday night. I promised to leave an apple at the trailhead. I kept walking until the parking lot came into view, and then it was gone. And I had both the feeling I'd been escorted and the certainty I'd been warned." Another man, a local, said he had seen the lights float low across the river like lanterns borne by people who didn't care whether water and flame were supposed to argue. "They went through fog like it wasn't there," he said. "And the fog didn't shine. That's how I knew they were their own thing. not reflections. The mountain makes its own inventory. Skeptics keep their footing here too. On some nights, you can line up a light with a break in the tree line and catch the pulse of a car cresting a far-off hill. You can time it, predict it, prove it. The ranger doesn't mind. One of the best things about a mystery, he said, is that it lets you gather evidence on both sides and still end the night glad you came. Claire packed her camera when the wind picked up. She said she had what she needed. Proof enough to put in a frame, doubt enough to keep her coming back. Months later, I got an email from her with a single image attached. The ridge, a black seam. The sky, a long exposure wash of soft navy, and 3 lights arranged in a triangle. Their edges clean, their centers almost textured as if the light had grain. She didn't caption it. She didn't have to. There was one more story that night, one the mountain told in a harder voice. After most people left, the ranger asked if we had seen the small wooden sign back by the trailhead, the one with paper tucked beneath plastic. "Missing hiker," he said. 2 months now. Search teams swept the gorge until their boots came apart. No sign. His mother still drives up every Saturday. She doesn't stay long. She stands right over there with her hands in her coat like she is trying to hold the air together. Then she goes. He looked at the ridge. Sometimes the lights come on those nights. They hang lower, like they're trying to be read. I don't tell her that. Hope is a heavy thing. You have to measure it like medicine. I thought of the Cherokee tale, the lanterns of those still looking. I thought of the gentleman who said thank you and stopped coming. I thought of Raphael, bargaining with an orb like a child bargaining with bedtime. I thought of how many places in these mountains have stories that begin with someone stepping off a familiar path and end with a question mark that never stops blinking. On our way out, the mountain gave us one last flare, a red bead rising straight from the gorge, brighter than any we'd seen, holding steady at the height of a church steeple for a full breath, then dimming, then gone. The ranger didn't look surprised. "Some folks say that's a warning," he said. "Others say it's a yes." "What do you say?" I asked. He smiled without showing teeth. "I say it keeps the night honest." Driving down the switchbacks, the radio went to static for 2 long seconds, then came back mid-chorus. The headlights caught frost on the grass and made a million small mirrors. The forest leaned close to the road and then leaned back again, like someone reconsidering a touch. Claire rode in silence beside me with her camera in her lap, her fingers on the strap as if she were afraid the picture might fly away. We reached the last curve before the highway, and both of us turned to look back at the ridge without speaking. Nothing showed. That didn't feel like proof of anything. Out here, absence is another way the mountain speaks. You can argue about what the brown mountain lights are until your mouth dries. Refraction. Piezoelectric stress sparking along quartz veins, atmospheric ducting of man-made lamps, spirits with unfinished errands. I'm not here to outlaw anyone's answer. I'm here to tell you that when people stand at the edge of a dark world and it answers with fire, something inside them remembers how to listen. This is Eerie Echoes. We collect these stories because they insist on being carried. A voice in Tennessee, a light in North Carolina, and next, something harder to hold. Deeper in the Smokies, a family picnic on Father S Day turned into a search that swallowed the hills and never spit back the name they were calling. No lights to guide them, no voice to bargain with, just the forest, repeating itself tree by tree, hour by hour, until hope thinned to a thread. Stay with me. The trail is narrow from here, and the shadows don't always keep to the edges. Coming up, the lost boy of the Smokies. This is the story of Dennis Martin. The Martin family knew these woods well. Knoxville wasn't far, and the Smokies had always been their escape. Green ridges unrolling forever, rivers cold enough to sting, and valleys wide enough to make you believe the world had room for everything. On June 14, 1969, they drove into Cades Cove and then on to Spence Field, a high meadow edged with trails. The grass bent under the wind like 1,000 whispers. Butterflies rose and fell. The air smelled of pine and soil, and the ridges around them stood watch like old giants. It was Father's Day, and 3 generations had gathered, grandfather, father, sons, celebrating with sandwiches, laughter, and the easy joy of family. Dennis was just 6 years old, small, bright-eyed, wearing a red shirt his mother had packed, a color that should have made him stand out against the green, a color that, in theory, should have made him impossible to miss. The boys played hide-and-seek near the edge of the field. Their laughter ran ahead of them, darting between trees. Dennis wanted to surprise the adults by circling around and jumping out. He slipped into the brush, quiet as he could manage, his red shirt vanishing into the folds of summer shadow. Minutes passed, then more. The other boys returned, triumphant, but Dennis didn't. His father called his name, first lightly, then sharper. The wind carried the sound into the trees, and the trees gave nothing back. The search. At first, they thought it was a prank stretched too far. "Come on out, Dennis," his father said, scanning the field. But the boy didn't appear. The grass kept moving in waves, indifferent. Panic rose like a storm. His father tore into the woods, shouting, pushing through branches until his arms bled. The grandfather ran the opposite way. Strangers in the meadow joined in. The sun dropped lower, shadows crowding the ridges. No laughter, no red shirt, nothing. By nightfall, the search had begun in earnest. Rangers, volunteers, families from nearby campgrounds. Flashlights bobbing like small frantic stars in the dark. Whistles blown, trails beaten wider. By dawn, hundreds had gathered. Within days, more than 1,400 people combed the terrain. Green Berets, Boy Scouts, bloodhounds. Helicopters circled. The Smokies shook with human sound. And still, no Dennis. The forest fights back. Searchers reported strange things. The bloodhounds lost the scent quickly, circling confused, whining as if they didn't want to go deeper. Some swore they heard something moving just beyond their lights, footsteps that stopped when they stopped, breathing that wasn't their own. One man claimed he saw something pale and wild moving along a ridge, a tall, ragged figure carrying what looked like a bundle slung over its shoulder. He told rangers. They told him he must have been mistaken. But the story leaked into whispers of feral people, wild folk who live hidden in the Smokies, shunning society. To this day, locals debate whether Dennis crossed paths with something human, or not quite human. The land itself conspired against the search. Rain fell hard the second day, washing away tracks, turning trails into mud. The creeks rose, cold and loud, drowning out voices. Hypothermia lurked in every shadow. Time became the enemy. Days passed. Searchers widened their net to miles. The mountains stretched taller with every failure. Maps grew thick with circles and lines. Helicopters scanned heat signatures. Nothing matched a boy's small frame. By the third week, hope had thinned. The Martins stayed in the park, faces hollowed, answering questions no parent should. Newspapers printed the story nationwide, boy lost in Smokies, and speculated about bears, kidnappers, accidents. Each theory sounded crueler than the last because none returned the child. Finally, after weeks, the search shrank. The voices calling Dennis's name grew fewer, then stopped. The forest closed again, its silence deeper than before, as if it had absorbed the noise and learned something from it. Dennis Martin was never found. No body, no clothing, no trace. His red shirt, bright enough to pierce a forest, vanished as if swallowed whole. His parents carried the absence like a weight they could never set down. And the Smokies carried the story into legend. Hikers still whisper about footsteps behind them, about children's laughter on trails where no child walks. Some claim to see flashes of red deep between the trees, a small figure darting just out of sight. Others say the feral people of the Smokies took him, raising him or consuming him in ways best left unimagined. The official record says missing. The mountains say otherwise. When you walk Spence Field at dusk, the grass still bends in waves, the butterflies still rise, the ridges still watch. But if you step too close to the trees, you may feel it, the weight of a story that hasn't finished telling itself. You may hear your name carried on the wind, soft, curious, almost playful. And you may understand why a family's laughter turned to grief on Father S. Day in 1969, never to return. The forest of the Smokies took Dennis Martin and left behind only silence and questions. Some say he was lost to nature, some whisper of darker hands. Either way, the mountains proved once again that they choose what they keep. But not every mystery in Appalachia ends with a child. Sometimes it's a wanderer, a man with no home but the trail who carries his secrets until the wilderness claims him. Our next story follows a hiker known only by a name he gave himself, mostly Harmless. He walked the Appalachian Trail with no map, no phone, and no past anyone could trace until his body was found and his identity became a riddle the internet tried to solve. Coming up, the mystery of Mostly Harmless. He appeared the way many hikers do, sudden, quiet, already in motion. In the spring of one year not so long ago, people on the Appalachian Trail began to mention a tall, lean man moving steadily through Georgia and into the Carolinas. He carried a clean, simple kit. No phone, no GPS. He asked for directions the way travelers used to, with a folded map, a finger, and an honest question. He was polite, soft-spoken, and alone. When asked where he was headed, he'd say, "South for now," and smile like the distance itself was the destination. At Neil Gap, a trail angel remembered the way he stood outside the outfitter's window, looking at boots he didn't buy. He was careful with money, she told me, but not stingy with conversation. At a hostel near Hot Springs, a bunkmate said he played cards and never bluffed. Didn't need to. He liked the math of things. In the Smokies, a ridge runner recalled the way he ate. Slow, deliberate, like he'd long ago learned that food tastes better when you don't have to hurry it. He wasn't chasing a record. He was learning the rhythm of the long walk. Wake to birds, climb out of shade, listen for water, sleep where the wind says you can. If you hike long enough, you learn that the trail is a moving town with miles for streets. News travels. Mostly Harmless became a name passed between shelters and fire rings. He wore denim early on, which earned him a second, less kind nickname, Denim. But the one that stuck was kinder, and it came, people said, from an old sci-fi book he liked. Mostly Harmless. It sounded like humor. It sounded like hope. He kept a notebook. Hikers who shared shelter space with him remember it clearly. Pages of numbers and grids, rough diagrams that might have been maps or games. He said he had worked with computers once, and he missed puzzles more than he missed screens. When someone tried to take a photo for their Instagram, he'd laugh and turn away. "You go ahead," he'd say. "I'm not photogenic." The few images people did get show a man with a smart, tired grin and a body already whittled down by miles. Summer changed the trail's voice. Thunder rolled across the ridges, and the heat made the air thick as stew. Mostly Harmless kept walking. He drifted in and out of the Appalachian highlands, then down and east, teasing the idea of other paths, blue blazes to overlooks, side trails that smelled like old pine and new thunder. Far to the south, another footpath calls itself a trail. Sandy, swamp-edged, palmetto cut. The way stories are told now, he took that road too. He never stopped being kind. In towns, he paid cash and tipped for coffee. "He thanked me for the water twice," a gas station clerk said, like he was embarrassed by how good it tasted. He was nobody's problem. That was his strength and his danger. In a world that rewards noise, he stayed quiet enough to be forgotten until the forgetting turned permanent. When people talk about him now, they remember conversations in fragments. A woman in the Nantahala said he asked about wildflowers and listened so carefully to the answer you wanted to tell him more. A trail angel outside Damascus said he refused a ride because he wanted to earn the next mile. An old man in the Cohuta told me he saw him reading a paperback with the cover torn off and smiling at a joke that had nothing to do with anyone else. Put all those shards together and you get a silhouette you can almost see through. A person you'd like to know, standing just behind the steam of your breath on a cold morning. And then the reports stop being about sightings and start being about a tent. Deep in a wet, flat country where the ground remembers every footprint in mud, two hikers came upon a small gray tent in a quiet stand of trees. There was cash inside, more than most hikers carry, neatly tucked away. A notebook, some supplies. A man lay in the tent, thin as a winter shadow. He hadn't been gone long. He looked like he had come to the edge of hunger and kept going because there was nowhere else to walk. No ID, no phone, no name that a database could hold. The story grew outward in circles, like rain in standing water. Rangers wrote what rangers must. The coroner did what coroners do. Online, hikers posted the face they remembered and stamped it with the name they had given him. Mostly Harmless. I shared ramen with him near Dick's Creek Gap. I played cards with him at Standing Bear. He was good company. People built maps of memory. A journalist drew the shape of the mystery for those who had never shouldered a pack. And the internet did what the internet does at its best and worst. It began to care loudly. In forums and long comment threads, strangers became sleuths. They zoomed on pixels of a pack. They argued about brands of gear and the kinds of people who prefer graphite pencils. They listed foods he bought in towns: oatmeal, honey buns, peanut butter, and tried to match purchase habits to a man without a past. Some of it was crass. Much of it was honest grief in a new shape. People wanted to know the name because a name is the first thing the earth takes when it wants to keep a person forever. If you can hold on to it, you keep a little something the ground can't have. It took time. It took DNA. It took the patience of strangers who refused to let him become a line in a ledger. Eventually, the grid of numbers in the notebook, the faces around campfires, the last receipts in small towns, none of that named him. Science did. The identity came softly, official and deliberate, and the trail name stepped aside for the one he had been born with. The announcement didn't solve the questions that matter most. It almost never does. But somewhere, people who once knew him outside the miles were able to lift their heads in the mornings and put their hands on a memory that finally answered when called. I've been asked if this story belongs to Appalachia. The tent was discovered far south of these ridges. The last silence he heard wasn't the thin silence of spruce, but the heavy hush of water and grass. But the long walk that carried him there began in these mountains, under these storms, across these balds where fog makes new countries at dawn. The culture that fed him and nodded to him and gave him a second name, the code of kindness between strangers on a narrow path, that is Appalachian to the bone. A town stretched as thin as a line of blazes. A congregation of tired feet and easy smiles. A graveyard of unanswered questions. There is a particular horror in a death without violence, a vanishing that happens in front of the sky with no one to play the villain. It suggests a world so wide and indifferent that a person can starve beside 1,000 small mercies, cash unspent, food badly rationed, help avoided because to ask would break a rule only you can hear. Mostly, Harmless felt, to many, like the best kind of traveler. Harmless, gentle, careful not to take more than he gave. The trail can be kind to people like that. It can also be cruel in a quiet way that leaves no marks. It asks each of us the same question in a different voice. What carries you when the map runs out? Hikers who knew him say he wanted to solve something. The notebook muttered of puzzles, as if he was building a game that would teach him how to move through a level with no enemies and still reach an end. Maybe he wanted to walk clean from one life into another and let the footpath redraw his edges. Maybe he wanted only to see how far kindness and calories could carry a person toward an answer he had not found yet. The trail is a teacher. Its lessons are paid for in skin and time. He paid more than most. When people tell his story around new campfires, they do it carefully. They don't linger on the last days in the tent. They speak instead of the way he thanked them for water, the way he listened, the way he looked at a mountain and smiled, like he had just remembered an old joke that still worked. They say his trail name out loud because it meant something true and gentle about him, and because saying it is a way of placing a marker beside a long, unmarked road. Some nights, when the fog pulls across the balds and the wind threads the spruce like a harp, hikers swear they hear slow footsteps pacing just beyond the shelter. Not menacing, measured. A headlamp halo moving through trees without a head to cast it. The zipper of a tent that opens to no one. It's easy to make ghosts of the lost. It's human to hope they're still walking. This is Eerie Echoes, and we carry this one with care. He walked out of the southern Appalachians with a trail name, and when the world finally gave back the one he was born with, it didn't erase the miles. The white blazes he followed run farther than they look. They cross state lines and definitions and the thin seam between a good plan and a bad day. And sometimes, too often, the forest doesn't send you signals loud enough to catch. Our next story belongs to a woman who did almost everything right. She carried a phone and a map and a bright spirit and a will to live that bent the woods around her. And still, the trees closed. She left notes. She left love. She left a lesson that every hiker in these mountains carries now like a second compass. In July of 2013, Geraldine Largay stepped into the Maine woods with a pack on her back and hope in her stride. Friends called her Jerry. Hikers called her by her trail name, Inchworm, because she walked slowly, steady as a metronome, one patient step after another. She wasn't chasing speed. She was chasing experience, the long string of miles that would stitch her life into something larger. The Appalachian Trail in Maine is no gentle footpath. By then, Inchworm had already carried herself through hundreds of miles. She had endured storms, sweat, and the long arithmetic of blisters. She had friends on the trail, hiking partners who admired her persistence. On July 21st, she set out from the Poplar Ridge lean-to. Her partner had left the trail earlier that week due to illness, so she pressed on alone. The plan was simple, a 12-mile hike to the next meeting point. She carried a tent, a sleeping bag, and a phone. It should have been enough. At some point that morning, she stepped off the trail. Maybe it was for a bathroom break. Maybe she wanted a better spot to rest. The Appalachian Trail is marked by white blazes, but Maine's forests are dense, thick spruce and fir, understory tangled like a fisherman's net. Take 3 steps off the path and the trees close around you. Take 10, and the trail vanishes as if it was never there. When Inchworm turned back, the white blaze was gone. She realized quickly she was lost, but she didn't panic, not at first. She tried to rejoin the trail. She moved steadily as she always had, but the blazes never returned. She tried again, looping back, calling out. Nothing answered. By afternoon, she knew she needed to stop. She pitched her tent in a small clearing, hoping to wait it out. Searchers later said it was well placed, high ground, safe from flooding, visible enough. But visibility is a cruel joke in Maine's forests. From above, the canopy knits itself closed. From the ground, the world shrinks to green walls. When she didn't arrive at her meeting point, her husband raised the alarm. The search began quickly. Wardens, volunteers, dogs, helicopters. The woods echoed with her name. But the forest is patient, and the searchers were looking in the wrong place. For 26 days, Inchworm survived. When her campsite was finally discovered, 2 years later by accident, there was evidence of her fight. Her tent was still there, collapsed by time, but intact. Her belongings neatly organized. Inside, searchers found her journal. The entries were heartbreaking in their orderliness. She wrote notes to her family, love letters in case they were the last words she could give. She documented her attempts to find the trail, the rations she stretched, the prayers she whispered. One note read simply, "When you find my body, please tell my husband George that I died in peace." She had tried to send messages from her phone, but no signal reached. Her last attempt to text was never delivered. She was less than 2 miles from the trail, 2 miles from salvation. But the mountains don't measure distance the way we do. By the end, Inchworm had done everything right. She had rationed her food. She had chosen shelter wisely. She had left behind messages of love rather than despair. But the forest had decided. And so her trail name, once a token of gentle humor, became a gravestone carved in memory. When wardens finally found her site in 2015, they stood in silence. The air was heavy, as if the trees themselves remembered her struggle. Rangers, men who had searched for her until their boots wore through, removed their hats. Even the birds seemed to pause. Her story rippled outward more than most. Every hiker who heard it packed an extra compass. Every warden used her name as a cautionary tale in training. But beyond the lessons, there was something else. The way she met the dark, with dignity, with love, with steady words written in a notebook that outlasted her. When people read those entries, they feel her presence, still calm, still deliberate, still inching forward even as time closed in. She remains on the trail in every caution sign, every ranger's warning, every whispered prayer before setting foot into the Maine woods. Mostly Harmless left us with riddles. Inchworm left us with love. One carried a notebook of puzzles, the other, a journal of farewells. Both remind us that the trail keeps what it wants. But not every story ends with mystery or mercy. Sometimes the mountains hold a cruelty with teeth, a violence that leaves scars on more than one family. Our next story takes us back to 1970, to Madison County, North Carolina, where a young woman named Nancy Dean Morgan volunteered her summer to help others, only to meet a darkness that has never been brought to justice. Stay close. The woods are about to show their sharpest edge. Coming up, the murder of Nancy Dean Morgan. Nancy was just 24. Bright, driven, and compassionate, she had joined VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, a program meant to fight poverty in some of the country's hardest-hit communities. Her assignment took her to Madison County, North Carolina, a place of ridges and hollers, of narrow roads curling through mountains where families had lived for generations in near isolation. It wasn't an easy posting. Poverty was harsh here, industry scarce, and suspicion of outsiders ran deep. Still, Nancy believed in her work. She wanted to give something to these hills, not take anything from them. But Appalachia has always had two faces, the face of beauty and the face of hunger. That summer, Nancy would see both. June 17, 1970. Nancy borrowed a car to attend a VISTA meeting. She was last seen that evening leaving the gathering, driving into the folds of mountain night. What happened next was never truly known. The next morning, her car was found abandoned. Her purse was still inside. There was no sign of Nancy. The forest had opened its mouth, and she had stepped inside. Days later, hikers found her body in a wooded area. She had been strangled. No robbery. No clear motive, just violence, raw and unanswered. The county shook. For years, Appalachia had known poverty, hardship, even crime. But not this. A young outsider, come to help, cut down in silence. The authorities cast a wide net. Suspects rose and fell. One man was even brought to trial, but the evidence wavered, the story bent, and the jury let him go. The case dissolved into dust, as so many rural tragedies do. But whispers remained. Some said she had angered locals by asking too many questions. Others believed it was a crime of opportunity, a stranger on a back road. Still others, more superstitious, said the mountains themselves had rejected her, that an outsider who dug too deep into old ways sometimes found things better left buried. The truth, whatever it was, lay hidden under the canopy. Madison County never forgot. For decades, locals would point to the hollow where she was found, lowering their voices, warning children not to linger there. Outsiders traveling through sometimes noticed the silence that clung to that part of the road, the way even the birds seemed to avoid singing. For Vista, the murder was a shockwave. Other volunteers withdrew, fearing for their safety. Trust between locals and outsiders frayed. The work Nancy had hoped to do, the bridges she wanted to build, crumbled before they were ever finished. And her name slipped into Appalachian folklore. Not just a headline, not just a file gathering dust, but a story told around kitchen tables when the nights stretched long. That S where they found the volunteer girl. Like many Appalachian tragedies, the details blurred over time, becoming sharper in some places, softer in others. Some said she was seen walking alone before she vanished, her red hair catching the last light of day. Others swore the sound of a woman's voice still echoes in those woods, calling for help that never comes. One hiker, years later, reported camping not far from the spot. He said that after midnight he woke to the sound of footsteps circling his tent. A woman's voice whispered just beyond the nylon, "Please, can you help me?" He froze. The voice repeated, softer each time, until it was swallowed by the wind. When he stepped out at dawn, there were no tracks. Locals nodded when he told the story. "That's her," they said. "She hasn't rested." Nancy's story became more than a crime. It became a warning. In Appalachia, the woods are never neutral. They hold memory, they hold judgment, they hold secrets. Hers was one they refused to release. For the people who knew her, the grief is still personal. For strangers, the horror lies in the randomness, the cruelty of a young woman doing good struck down without reason. But for the mountains, the story is something deeper. Proof that beauty and danger are twined too tightly here to ever pull apart. Was it someone she trusted? Someone who offered a ride and then turned? Or was it a stranger passing through? Violence in his hands like a contagion? No one knows. The case remains unsolved, the file still cold, the story unfinished. But in the Appalachian imagination, unfinished stories are the most dangerous. They grow in the silence. They twist themselves into folklore. They teach lessons the way scars do, harsh, permanent, undeniable. Nancy Dean Morgan came to Appalachia to help heal poverty. Instead, she became another of its mysteries, one the land will not let go. From the haunting of Inchworm to the murder of Nancy Morgan, the trail teaches us the same truth. Appalachia gives, and Appalachia takes. It raises legends of light. It whispers in caves. It swallows children and silences the innocent. And now, our journey ends here. 7 stories, 7 echoes from the ridges. If they unsettled you, if they linger in your thoughts long after the telling, then you understand. The Appalachians never let go. This Chanel Eerie echoes. If you want to walk further into the dark with us, if you want more nights of whispers, shadows, and the truths the daylight hides, stay close, subscribe, follow, and keep the fire burning with us. Until we meet again. Keep your eyes on the trail, keep your ears open in the silence, and remember, the mountains are listening. Always.